Okay, I guess that makes it my turn. Uh, so thank you all for being here this morning. The title of my talk this morning is When Buddha Sang the Blues. But before I jump into the message, I want to begin with a moment of humility. I am not native to either Buddhism or the blues. I'm a middle-class white guy who was raised in a Christian household. So I'm very sensitive to concerns about cultural appropriation. My hope here is to convey how these two powerful cultural touchpoints, a religious philosophy from the Far East and a musical philosophy that comes out of the oppression of African Americans, how do these disparate philosophies overlap, and how do they inform my own approach to life? In other words, I do not claim any ownership or special knowledge of these spheres of wisdom. Rather, I offer with humility a personal philosophy that has been informed by my experience with them. The famous bluesman B.B. King once explained that, quote, "The blues are a simple music, and I'm a simple man. But the blues aren't a science. The blues can't be broken down like mathematics. The blues are a mystery, and mysteries are never as simple as they look." This morning, I'd like to explore some of that mystery with you. At the core of both Buddhism and the blues is the idea of suffering, where it comes from and how to live with it. Every human deals with suffering, the inherent daily dissatisfaction and unhappiness that comes from wanting things to be different than they are. This is very clear in blues music with songs about lost love, poverty, sickness, and all manner of bad luck, as we heard. And in Buddhism, the first noble truth tells us that suffering is an inescapable part of life. In The Engaged Spiritual Life, author Donald Rothberg explains where suffering comes from a Buddhist perspective, the second noble truth, using the Buddha's analogy of the two arrows. Imagine getting shot by an arrow, the Buddha says. This is pain, and it's a common part of life. From physical ailments to the emotional pain of heartbreak to psychological trauma, including isolation from too much social distancing. We're all experiencing pain of one form or another. The Buddha differentiates this pain from suffering, which he describes as a second arrow. The second arrow comes as a reaction or resistance to the first arrow of pain. When we feel pain, we often lash out at others or at ourselves, causing the pain of the first arrow to grow and to spread. It is our desire to not feel pain, to have things be other than how they are, that causes suffering. As Rothberg explains, quote, "For the Buddha, the task of spiritual practice is not to rid ourselves of all pain, to prevent being shot by the first arrow. Rather, our core intention is not to shoot this second arrow. It is to learn how to open to pain and suffering when they appear, so that we can increasingly be present with the pain, but without suffering and without compounding the suffering." The blues, in my mind, is also very much about being present with pain and suffering. In his song Hard Time Killing Floor Blues, Skip James sings, "Hard times is here, and everywhere you go, times are harder than they've ever been before. You know that people, they're drifting from door to door, but they can't find no heaven. I don't care where they go." Note that this isn't just about avoiding pain. Suffering also comes from trying to gain pleasure. In their famous song on the topic, Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, one of the most famous blues bands ever, sings, "I can't get no satisfaction, 'cause I try and I try and I try." Note the "cause" in there. In other words, striving for satisfaction, that is, shooting the second arrow, this is the source of suffering. In Why Buddhism is True, Robert Wright explains it this way. One of the Buddha's main messages was that the pleasures we seek evaporate quickly and leave us thirsting for more. We spend our time looking for the next gratifying thing, the next powdered sugar donut, the next physical encounter, the next status-enhancing promotion, the next online purchase. But the thrill always fades, and it leaves us wanting more. All of this is to say that in Buddhism, you are punished not for your sins, but by them. In Buddhist tradition, it is negative emotions, greed and aversion, as well as confusion about the true nature of the universe that causes our suffering. Greed in Buddhism is the grasping desire for things that we don't or can't have. Aversion is hatred of things that seem unpleasant. And confusion is the mistaken belief that anything in life is permanent. By enabling and acting on these emotions, we cause suffering in ourselves and spread it to others. There are, of course, a number of blues songs that also recognize this dynamic. Back in 1966, Howlin' Wolf explained it this way, quote, "A lot of people's wondering, what is the blues?" he said. "When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money and can't pay your house rent and can't buy you no food, you damn sure got the blues, because you're thinking evil. Anytime you're thinking evil, you're thinking about the blues." This is probably why the blues is often called the devil's music. The emotions that cause suffering, especially greed, which often manifests as lust in the blues, and hatred, are seen as evil. Indeed, it's not hard to see why. As the father of the Delta blues, old Robert Johnson himself sang in Me and the Devil Blues, "Me and the devil was walking side by side, and I'm going to beat my woman until I get satisfied." Johnson associates his anger and his desire to commit violence as walking with the devil. That is to say that it's evil, right? No question about that. And he also seems to acknowledge that the violence will not, in the end, bring him any satisfaction. And now you may be asking, if these negative emotions are so bad, should we strive to be like the Stoics and avoid all emotion? Well, I certainly don't think you'd find any support for that among blues musicians. After all, despite all of the heartache that love seems to bring them, blues singers always go back for more. The joy of love is worth the pain that sometimes comes with it. But what about Buddhists? It may be tempting to think of Buddhist monks as tranquil and perpetually calm, the essence of emotionless stoicism. But one look at statues of the laughing Buddha shows that Buddhism is hardly a religion devoid of emotions. In Zen Master Raven, his book of Buddha's parables, great little book that I highly encourage everyone who's got an interest in to pick up. Robert Aitken tells the story that illustrates this point, I think, quite well. It goes like this. Grandma was chatting with Turkey when granddaughter made a surprise visit. That evening after supper, when they had caught up with each other's news, granddaughter said, "Now that I've finished school, I don't know what I will do next." Grandma said, "Follow your bliss." Granddaughter said, "That sounds selfish." Grandma said, "Your employers don't all have desks and files." Next evening, Turkey asked Raven about Grandma's advice. Raven said, "It's like Brown Bear said, the robin sings in the oak tree, the finch sings in the madrona." Turkey did not respond. Woodpecker asked, "Aren't they distractions?" Raven asked, "From what?" Turkey seemed to come to herself and gobbled. Raven said, "Like that." Now, this story has many layers of meaning, but for our purposes, one message is clear. Following your bliss requires exploring your emotions. What both the Buddha and blues musicians accept is that you don't get rid of suffering. You can't just wish it away. You learn to let it go by understanding. For Buddhists, this typically happens in meditation. Meditation gives you the opportunity to explore your emotions, both the good and the bad, and to understand how they affect your mind and body. In fact, many new meditators find they are initially less happy when they begin their practice and spend so much time exploring their unpleasant emotions. But this practice, when followed diligently, often leads to breakthrough. By understanding how grasping, clinging, and striving for an elusive happiness actually produces suffering, Buddhists can find they escape the worst of it without abandoning the emotions that give life its meaning. Singing the blues, at least for me, offers a similar opportunity for catharsis. While the lyrics express the pain and suffering of hard-scrabble lives, the music of the blues is overflowing with joy. The earliest blues music was, in fact, mostly made to dance to in juke joints across the American South. Yes, it describes difficult times, but it does so in a way that brings a smile to your face. Yes, life is hard, and there will be pain and sadness throughout, but that's not the whole story. Buddhism teaches us that everything in this world is impermanent, both the good things and the bad. When you fight against that by despising your current circumstances or grasping for things you can't have, you multiply your suffering beyond its original cause. Instead, seek to understand the source of your suffering and that of those around you, but don't let it control you and how you feel. And never forget what the great Muddy Waters said. You can't spend what you ain't got, and you can't lose what you ain't never had. So now we have an opportunity to open up for discussion. How does suffering manifest itself in your life, especially in these difficult times? And how do you live with the pain while still following your bliss? I play blues music because that brings me joy. But now I think we will be able to open up. If you raise your hand, then you'll get an opportunity, or you can type something in the chat. How does suffering manifest itself in your life? And how do you live with your pain while still following your bliss?
What do you have to say? Brooke, these are really great words. Thank you for this sermon. This is especially helpful to me today. What I was going to say is, when I'm really suffering, I really need to go out in nature because I feel like I have to look at all the trees and see the ones that are dying and the ones that have been dead and the ones that are, providing cover for others and the new life that sprouts out from the dead. It's really the only way I can really grasp that Buddhist principle that everything is impermanent. And so that really helps me, along with being with my kids and just, really needing to be present for their sake and wanting to show them how to healthily process emotion and, that it's okay to have big emotions. And so that helps me too, just knowing who I have to be for them.
Liz says pets. It's obviously a good one. Getting to pet them and enjoy their company. their joy. I know our dog is really happy to have us home all the time right now.
This is Jan. I can I suffer in terms of getting a lot of physical stress, just holding tension in my body, and getting outside and walking around and just being out in the fresh air is renews my spirit.
Haley writes, I write songs about what's happening and what I'm feeling. If I can't write exactly what's happening, the mood of the song will match what I'm feeling. Getting my emotions out in a way I can hold and repeat, but keep outside of myself is very helpful. Thank you, Haley. Yeah, that's fantastic. Would love to hear some of those songs when you get a chance.
This is Katie. This time of year, not necessarily just this year is odd, but this time of year before or as things are just starting to start growing, I've noticed that I feel a little anxious maybe of, is everything really going to start growing again? And so noticing, I don't have crocuses up in my yard yet, but I have some of the green shoots and my rhubarb. And so it's definitely very calming in some way to notice that new growth this time of year.
Lynn tells us, I release the stress of all I can't control by getting busy and accomplishing something I can do, like cleaning the linen closet. It's a good time for some spring cleaning. It's officially spring. And Stephanie tells us it manifests itself as anxiety. I walk in nature and see all the changes, the new growth, the changes to last year's trees, and I know it will change.
And I see Janice has her hand raised, so I'm going to unmute. Oh, there we go. Janice.
This is Janice, and so many people at MSUS are really soothed by nature. I have never been a nature person at heart. So, yes, I could go outside and stand and let the fresh air come over me, but that still won't quiet my mind. I need something that can actually take me out of myself. So I find that getting on the computer and going to YouTube and finding some songs that have inspired me and just kind of go from link to link to link. And that kind of quiets my mind. The other thing that I do is for stress relief is a breathing technique I was taught by one of my life transition counselors. And that is to simply breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth to counts of 4. And what that does is lower my shoulders, and it helps my tremor, and it lets me concentrate on my breath. So I'm more of a techie de-stressor than I am a nature de-stressor. Thank you.
Thanks, Janice. And I see Beth Strutman has written, right now the housing market is crashing along with the general economy. So I've taken my house off the market and feel a bit of peace and try to remind myself to be grateful that I have a house to sell, and someday that will happen.
And Polly has her hand up.
Okay, not finding Polly for some reason.
Polly, I think you can unmute yourself if you
Yeah,
the button.
there you are.
Unmute.
All right, I unmuted you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Brock. Great topic. I struggle with, my go-to is grief. Just this loneliness is really, really hitting on that grief. But I've certainly tried a lot of unhealthy coping through drugs and alcohol, and that was not helpful. So right now, what I do is I reach out to people. I reach out to people I know, like all of you, or my AA buddies, and I talk, and it gets me through. That's it.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. It's important in this time. I see Leslie writes that loneliness is a challenge. Grateful that her husband is with her, so she's not alone. Sunny days and walks outside as well.
And Ali, I've unmuted Ali.
The same theme, nature. I find it an interesting dichotomy that the humans are stuffed away in their houses because of illness, but the rest of nature is carrying on with no problem, absent us. I get a lot by going out into nature, and I love it that I can go play in the garden. And it feels to me like my pain and my joy can sit side by side when I'm in the garden. And I don't dispose of either one, they're both present.
Thank you, Ali. Tom writes, for me, the challenge is to let go of things I cannot change. Usually it's much worse in my imagination than it is in reality, and I need to remember that. My rejuvenation comes from interacting with others. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and Marcia, I'm going to unmute Marcia.
I've had a lot of fear around when am I going to see my grandchildren again, because I've taken care of them for 2 days a week for a long time. So I did are finding ways to still be in contact with each other by either, before the order to stay in place, I was able to go and see my 2 grandsons just through the glass door of the front door of their house. And I thought it would make me sad, but it was incredibly joyful for me when I left, because just even through the glass was important. I have a daughter who's been extremely anxious about just, the fear of where is the virus. And she has found a way to put her fear aside, and she's now making hand-sewn ear loop masks for Alina Health. And their website explains how to make them. There are many hospitals that need, I don't know if Alina is coordinating the drop-off, but this is something that she has found a way to alleviate the constant fear of the unknown.
Anna writes that she quilts. The repetitive up and down of a sewing machine, or the repetitiveness of hand quilting, clears and focuses my mind. And then the act of making and giving the final product to someone, whether to celebrate the birth of a baby or as a way to comfort, brings me joy. Roger Peck loved seeing the dogs who came to church. And Marie says, this afternoon I'm going to go outside and cut down old dead stuff. Being out in the backyard makes me happy. That's fantastic. Thank you all very much.